Doing the Shabbos daf, the Mishnah on 76b3, the Mishnah says Chamisha Devarim, 5 things. We have an halacha, as we talked about, Tumah Hutra B'tzibur. If everybody's Tumah, then there is no Tameh. We've talked about this before, which means that with regard to Karban Pesach, we said that you were able to bring the Karban Pesach if all the Kahanim were Tameh, or if all Klal Yisrael was Tameh, then nobody is Tameh, and you're allowed to bring the Karban Pesach. Tumah is Hutra, but Tumah is permitted in the Tzibur. There is another rule. The flip side is this: Tumah is Duchya B'tzibur. That where everybody is Tameh, it's not pshat that it's mutter, it's permitted completely, there is no forbidden. The truth is it's no good. But given the reality that everybody is Tameh, Duchya gets pushed B'tzibur. Reluctantly, the Torah allows us to go ahead and do it. That's going to be the conversation of today. Now, with regard to the Karban Pesach, once again, you're allowed to bring it b'tameh and you're allowed to eat it b'tameh, because the whole purpose of the Karban Pesach is to eat the Karban Pesach. Okay? If everybody's tameh, everybody can eat it b'tameh, because there is no avoiding it, since everybody's going to be tameh, and the only reason why you can bring it is so that it can be eaten. And if everybody's going to be, they're all tameh, they won't be able to eat, you won't be able to bring it. So therefore, not only can you be makriv, sacrifice, but you could also eat. That is unique to Pesach, as opposed to where we apply the rule of Tumah, Chutra B'tzibur. Tumah is allowed in the Tzibur, or Tumah is Duchya, or Tumah is pushed, right? Reluctantly, that is only in the Avodah by everywhere else, Lav Dafka with regard to actually eating it. And that essentially is what the whole Mishnah and the whole Gemara is going on. Zok Heilige Mishnah. Says the Mishnah. Chamisha Devarim Boim B'tumah, 5 things are brought B'tumah. That means if the community is B'tameh, but V'ei Nachlim B'tumah, but are not eaten in Tameh. They're not eaten B'tameh. What are they? The Omer. If you remember, the Omer was brought on the second day of Pesach, Tez in Nisan, which allowed us, that was the trigger to allow us to eat the new crop. The new crop that was now being produced would not be allowed to be eaten until the Omer, the Minchas Omer was brought, the common Minchas Omer was brought with the new crop, and then the new crop was allowed to be eaten. It was allowed to be eaten lechulin. That means we, the regular people, were allowed to start eating the new crop. In the Beis Hamikdash, they were not yet allowed to use the new crop until Shavuos, at which point the next thing in the Mishnah, Ushnei Halechem, when the 2 breads that were brought weighed on Shavuos, that triggered that in the Beis Hamikdash they were now allowed to use for the Karban. When the 2 breads that were brought nachais, they were allowed to use, and those are the breads that were put on the shulchan. The shulchan had 2 sides, the golden table, that side with the frankincense all around it. Okay, if the breads are tummy, everybody's tummy, you're allowed to replace the breads on Shabbos, from Shabbos to Shabbos. The zivchei shamei tzibor and the zivchei shamei tzibor, these are the shlomims that came along with the 2 loaves on Shavuos. They were the only 2 shlomims that are a Karban tzibur, or a communal offering of a shlomim that came together with the 2 loaves on Shavuos. The sirei Rosh Chodashim and the chatos, goats that are of Rosh Chodesh that are brought, that the pasuk says in Parshas Pinchas, which we lane every Rosh Chodesh. She brought 2 sirei Rosh Chodashim. The Pesach, and that's the Musafim. The Sirei Rosh Chodashim would be the Musafim, and Pesach Sheba B'tumah V'necha B'tumah. But the Pesach is different. The Pesach was brought just like the rest of these. The Tumah, when everybody was Tumah is Chutra B'tzibur, but as well, the Pesach was also eaten in a state of Tameh. Why? Because it was only brought in the first place for the purpose of eating. If an individual couldn't eat, that's okay, as long as people who register on it could eat from it. But in this case, all the people registered on it could not eat because everybody is coming, everybody is coming space for whatever reason. It was a war, whatever. In that case, you can bring the carbon Pesach, the sacrificial Pesach, plus you were allowed to go ahead and eat from the carbon Pesach. So Pesach turns out is slightly different than everything else, where we say Tumah is Hutra B'tzibur or Tumah is Duchya B'tzibur. Hutra B'tzibur means it's mutter, it's permitted entirely. The Isser is gone, the forbidden part is gone. Or no, Duchya, really the Isser is here. Because we have no other way of handling the situation. We're going to push it away. We can push it off, but we're not happy about it. Okay, so says the Gemara, the number 5 in the Mishnah, which says Chamisha Devarim. What's it coming to exclude? The Chagiga is Chamisha Asa, the Chagiga of the 15th, which otherwise is known as the Shalmei Chagiga. With every object, the Shalosh Regalim, Pesach, Shavuos and Sukkos, it says v'chagoisem chag techoigu es chag Hashem. Then you should celebrate your holidays together with Hashem. That is a special carbon chagiga that was brought. It's called chagiga chamisha asa because the first time you brought the shalmei chagiga in the year was on the 15th, the first day of Pesach, was when you bring it. But it means the shalmei chagiga the whole year. Now you have to teach that is excluded. We're on 76b4. The Salkadad Chamina, I might have thought, Chiva the carbon tzibur, who at the end of the day, the carbon chagig is a carbon tzibur, as Rashi points out, 3 lines from the bottom. Even though the truth of the matter is a chagiga, Shamachim is brought by every individual. It's called the Karilei carbon tzibur. It's still called a communal carbon. Mishum the Asi, because everybody who comes up by the regalim has to bring a carbon chagiga. So in the same way that a carbon Pesach is brought individually, but is considered a communal carbon, it's considered a carbon tzibur, because everybody must bring this carbon Pesach. Everybody who comes for regal must bring the chagiga. So even though it's brought individually as a collection within the communal, so it's called a communal carbon, a carbon tzibur. Even the carbon tzibur, the kavile moyed, and a moyed, time is affixed to it, i.e. the first day of Pesach, the first day of Shavuos, the first day of Sukkot. That's when Chag Yosem Chag. When you celebrate the other, you should do it together with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, Kamash Malan, even though it's a carbon tzibur, even though the Zaman, the Moyed, the time is fixed, Kamash Malan, still you don't say Tumah is Chutra B'tzibur. Chiv the Isla Tashlumin Kol Shiva, because there's a unique thing regarding the Chagiga, that you could do it at Tashlumin, you can compensate that if you didn't bring the first day of Yom Tov, you can bring it all 7 days. You can bring it all 7 days of Pesach, and you can bring it all 7 days of Sukkot. And believe this or not, even though Shavuos is only 1 or 2 days, you can bring it for 7 days, even on the whole days afterwards, because Chagiga gets 7 days of Tashlumin. And therefore, it's not, since you could do Tashlumin, it's not specific to the day, it's specific to the time frame, but not specific to the day. Shabbos, it does not override the Shabbos. But the Shabbos loidochi, and if it doesn't override the Shabbos, loidochi tumah, it does not override the tumah. Because when we say tumah is hutra b'tzibur, tumah is duchya b'tzibur, apilu b'Shabbos, apilu b'tumah, they're tied. So if it's now it doesn't override the Shabbos, it doesn't override the tumah. So now says the Gemara, but the Mishnah is missing something. You should also teach about the chatases that are brought with the musafim, the special musafim that you bring on the Yom Tovim. There are special seirei chatas, that are brought, that are carbon tziburs, which also should be allowed to bring with tumah, and just you won't be able to eat them, but you can go with tumah. Says the Gemara, it's buried in there. That's a very broad. The zivachim, the Zibchei Shalmi Tzibur, the Shalomim of the Tzibur. And in the words in the Shlamim Tzibur, if I can bring the Shlamim, I certainly can bring the Chatos. The Chatos which come to atone for Klal Yisrael, you certainly can bring it. That's not a problem. So therefore, if the Mishnah says Zivchi Shamit Tzibur, I'm allowed to bring B'tumah, I certainly can bring the Chatos B'tumah. It says, Ihachi Abazai, Seir, Rosh Chodoshim, Nami Lo listening in that case. Why did the Mishnah go out of its way to tell us Rosh Chodesh, the male goats of the Rosh Chodesh, that we bring it B'tumah? Why is God the way? Hatani Zivchei Shamit Tzibur. It fits into Zivchei Shamit Tzibur as well. And for the Gemara, Amri, we say, and we're on Ayin Zayin, Amid Aleph. Just give me 1 second. Check in my internet. I think I got a little bit of a problem. Just give me a second. So sorry. Give me 1 second. It's running slow. Let me make sure. Okay, no, we're connected. Okay, good. Okay, here we go. So we're on top of Ayin Zayin Amid Aleph. Shabbos is Daf. It says like this. I had to, the Mishnah, the Bryce, the Tana of the Bryce of the Mishnah had to bring specifically Rosh Chodesh. I might have thought. Regarding the Sira Rosh Chodesh, it doesn't say the word Moyed. It doesn't say the word time specific. So therefore it cannot be brought in a state of Tameh. Kamash Malon, the Rosh Chodesh Ikri Moyed. That the Rosh Chodesh is called a Moyed. The Kiddur Abaya, like Abaya. The Omer Abaya, because Abaya says, Tammuz, the High Shata Mili Malua. In that specific year, as we're going to talk about in a second, the Bezdin made Tammuz a full month of 30 days, not 29. The Ksiv in Eicha Kara Alai Moyed Lishbar Bechurei. And Hashem called it a Moyed, an appointed time against me to crush my young men. What was going on? We're talking about when Moshe Rabbeinu sent out the Meraglim, the spies, to Eretz Canaan in the Midbar in the wilderness. He sent them out, as the Gemara in Masechtas Tainus says, on the 29th of Sivan. 29th of Sivan, 40 days later, turned out to be the 8th of Av, the 8th day of Av. They came back and they gave their terrible report on Eretz Canaan. And so on the 9th of Av, on Tisha B'Av, Klal Yisrael sat in their houses crying about their terrible fate, that they're going to be sent into this land of Eretz Canaan, which was going to come Eretz Yisrael. They're going to all be HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, today you're crying for no reason. I'm going to make that in the future, this day. So what happened is that Ruach HaKodesh, it happened that Tammuz, they went out on the 29th of Sivan. If Tammuz had been a short month, right? If it had been a short, if the Chodesh over there was a short month, they would have come a day earlier. Everybody should have worked out the month that they showed up on the 8th of Tammuz, so that they would cry on the 9th of, on the 8th of Av. And so they would cry on the 9th of Av, and therefore what it calls set up the day of the 9th of Av as our day of lamentation, on our day of tragedy, the day that we, of course, read over the Book of Tears. So you see from over here that in Eichud, what is it called? Korei Olai Moyed. Listen. So, say to respect the Gemara, L'meimar. So therefore, what are you saying over here? To Kula Moyed Asu, that everything that we learned that Tumas Chutr B'Tzibor is pushed off, or is completely permitted in the Tzibor. We learned it out wherever it says appointed time, Moyed, Minohanimili. How do I know this? The Tanu Rabbanon, because the Rabbanon say, Vayedaber Moshe es Moyedei Hashem, and Moshe declared the appointed times of Hashem to the Bnei Yisrael, to the children of Israel. Ma Tamud Loima. Since we learn that the only kabbanis that are allowed to be brought on Shabbos, that are doiches Shabbos, or in a state of tumah, only regarding the tamid, the carbon tamid that's brought every single day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, tamid shel boikin, tamid shel ben arabaim, and of course the carbon pesach, shenemabahu b'moyadoi, because by them it says in its appointed time, which means b'moyadoi in its time, afilu b'Shabbos, b'moyadoi afilu b'tumah, in its time, even in Shabbos or even in tumah. Shar kabbanis tzibur minayin. How do I know that all the other communal offerings, all the other carbon tziburs, also as we say tumis chutra b'tzibur nedoicha Shabbos, shenema elu tasul Hashem b'moyadechem. And these you shall make for Hashem in your appointed times. Minayin the rabbis oimer v'akra how do I know to include the oimer, and that's brought with it in the Shnei Alechem Akarev Imam, and then the Shnei Alechem on Shavuos that's brought with them, one to Matre Chodosh for Chulin and one to be Matre Chodosh even for the Minchas in the Mizbeach. Talmud Loima by David Moshe Moyadei Hashem B'nei Yisrael. And Moshe declared the appointed days of Hashem to the children of Israel. Kosiv Kavuya Moyed Echad Lekulam. The pasuk is coming to establish an appointed time for all the offerings listed, i.e., all the kabbanis tzibur is tumah hutra b'tzibur, tumah b'tzibur it's the Shabbos, and it's tumah b'tzibur. So, afraid the Gemara, I need it so many times. Say it once, moyed, and I'll learn it from one. That in one case it's mutter on Shabbos and in tumah, and I'll learn it. I'll derive it to all the other cases. Now the Gemara is going to say no. We're on 77.8.2. V'chol hani lamali, and all these terms, all these mentions of moyed, do I really need it? Tzirich says where yes. If I had just said the word moyed by tamid, the tamid shabbai, the tamid shabbai that I bring every single day, that's why it's called tamid, the always carbon, right? Haba mina tamid shekain todia v'kolil. I would say that's because the tamid is pointed by its time because it's always brought, and it's completely brought up onto the mizbeach on the altar. It's completely burnt on the mizbeach. So it's brought every day, every single day, and it's burnt completely on the mizbeach. Abo Pesach loi, but Pesach, which is only brought once a year, which is brought to the end, it's not burnt entirely on the altar. Adarabi, you have to eat from it. I might have thought that it's not like the Shabbos, and it's certainly not brought b'tomei kamash malon. That no, b'moyadoi always in its time. I feel b'Shabbos, I feel b'tomei. Because of Rachmana b'Pesach, I've said it by Pesach. Pesach, I'd say Pesach has got a specialty. It's got a great chumrah, a great stringency. What is that? Shuhu oynish chorus. That if you don't bring it, you get cut off, right? Avol tamid, but the tamid, there ain't oynish chorus. But the tamid, it's true. It's brought every day and it's brought completely up on the mizbeach. But it's not chayiv chorus if you don't bring it. The chorus a malayim. I think it's not doiches Shabbos and it's certainly not brought b'tamei kamash malon. In its time, the Shabbos to b'tumah. Because of Rachmana hani tarte Pesach and tamid habamina hani hu diyesh bohem tzad chomor. Because each one of this have a specific stringency. Tamid Tadibikolo, Tamid is brought every day and it's burned completely on the other Mizbeah. Pesach Shuain is Karas. Pesach, because it's the rare mitzvah satseh besides Milah, that if you don't do it, you chayiv Karas. Abel Shar Kabbanis Tzibur, but all the rest of the communal offerings, all the rest of the carbon tziburs, Emalai, are not brought on Shabbos and are not brought B'tamei, Kasav Rachmana, Elu Tasis Lashem, Loyadechem. These you should make for Hashem in their appointed times. Appointed times, I feel b'Shabbos, I feel b'Yom, I feel b'Tum. Kasav Rachmana, Elu Tasis Lashem, B'Moyadechem, Haba, I might have thought, Shar Kabbanis Tzibur Boyin L'chaper. Since all the other covenants are coming to atone for us, the Musaf offerings are coming to atone for Klal Yisrael. All right, But the oimer on the 17th of Nisan and the Shnei Alechem that are brought on Shavuos are not coming to be mechaper anything. They're economic. They're only coming to permit consumption of the new crop. The oimer on the second day of Pesach comes to permit chulin, the regular use of crops, and the Shnei Alechem comes to allow us to use the new crops for the carbon menachos. Loi, in such a case, it cannot be brought on Shabbos or on Tomei. Kamash malom b'moyadoi, afilu b'Shabbos, afilu b'Tomei. Because of Rachmana oimer Shnei Alechem lechudayu, if the Torah only brought the oimer and the Shnei Alechem, we would have said, Havamina Adarabah, just the opposite. Oimer Shnei Alechem the lomid boy lahati. The oimer and the Shnei Alechem are coming to be matter, to permit. No, permit. To allow Klal Yisrael to do something. That would be Doichet the Shabbos and Afilu B'Tomah. Aval Hanach Loi, but all the other things are not coming to permit anything. They, what do you call it? They were not. All the other, it have all other reasons, but not to permit. Kamash Malon, therefore you have to bring every single case, have to get its own B'Moyadoi, its own B'Moyadechem, its own specific time to teach us in its time. I feel b'Shabbos, I feel b'Tumah. I feel you could find 1,000,001 reasons outside of saying those words that you would think that it would not be brought on Shabbos or not be brought b'Tumah. So now the Gemara says like this: Sevarim, they presumed, took an assumption, like we talked about earlier today. The Kula Tumah Duchya b'Tzibur. They were all in agreement that Tumah is pushed, is overridden b'Tzibur. In other words, I got no choices. It's not mattering it. The underlying issur of bringing something b'Tumah is here. But since everybody is Tumah and I must bring this stuff, okay, I'm pushing it off very reluctantly. And therefore, since it's very reluctant, the truth is the issur is still here. So what exactly in B'Tumah, in B'Tzibur, in a community where everybody's Tumah, what exactly is the trigger that is still allowing me to push off the tumah and say, okay, we're going to look at it as if it's tar? That's tafko be'ein tzitz l'ratzes. You therefore need the tzitz to be merapah. Once again, what was the tzitz? The tzitz was the golden band that's a kodesh l'Hashem, holy to Hashem, that the Kohen Gadol wore on his head, which, if you remember, the tzitz had the power, as it were, the magical power to mekasher, to make okay kabbanas that were brought b'tumah. Kabbanas that were brought b'tumah by accident. The tzitz came along and said, it's okay, it's maratza, it's okay, it could be brought up. But as I'm pointing out now, the tzitz is being maratza, the offering of the carbon. Nowhere am I saying the words that the tzitz has the power to allow to go a step further and allow you to eat from such an offering. The tzitz has the power to take such an offering and say, Meratza, it's accepted. To be brought up onto the altar, it's a murin, etc., to be brought up on the altar. Nowhere am I exactly saying, I'm couching my words here, obviously, that the tzitz has such power to go a step further and say, not only it could be offered, it could even now be eaten. Now we're going to go in. Essentially, that is where the Gemara is heading, into that conversation. Since it's only dochir b'tzibur, it's only pushed off. The issur essentially is here. The forbidden part is still here. We're just, because we have no choices, we're pushing it off. The power to push it off comes from the tzitz. The tzitz is maratza. So therefore, the lekatana the shamet leida the amatuma hotu b'tzibur. Because the truth is, we do not find that there is any tana that says tumah is hutra, is permitted b'tzibur, that there is no issur whatsoever. The issur is God. If everybody's tumah, nobody's tumah, and it's completely mutter. Elo Rabbi Yehuda, except Rabbi Yehuda. It's only Rabbi Yehuda that says tumah is hutra b'tzibur. 77a3. The Tanya, because we learned sits, the golden sits. Bein sheyesh nayal mitzchay. Whether the Kohen Gadol has got it on his forehead, ben she'enay mitzchay, or it's not it's in existence, but for some reason the Kohen Gadol is not wearing the tzitz. It doesn't matter. Miratze, it affects acceptance of the offering. It says an offering that was brought b'tomei, it has the magical power to go ahead and say, okay, it's miratze, it's accepted. You can bring it up on the altar. Divrei Rabbi Shimon. So says Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda says, "Oidiu al mitzchay misratze." When it's on his forehead, it's got its power. Kadosh Lashem to miratze dogs kapanis tabu bo pitome. And it al mitzchay, but if it's not on his forehead, its golden band is not on his forehead. Ein miratze doesn't have the power to affect the acceptance of a tomadik carbon, of a tomadik offering. Amalei Reb Shimon. So Reb Shimon said to Rabbi Yehuda, "What are you talking about? The Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur, Rabbi Yechiach, the Kohen Gadol, our priest on the holy state, the Yechiach, when he goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies, L'Fnayim L'Fnim, when he goes in, he's not wearing the golden vestments, and included in the golden vestments is the tzitz. The tzitz is gold. He takes it off, right? And you see what happens if he goes in there. And what he called it creates acceptance, it affects acceptance. It affects acceptance, even if the stuff that he brings in is tamei, it affects acceptance. So you see the tzitz works, even when the tzitz is not on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol. Amalai, Rabbi Yehuda said, Hanach liyam kippurim, put aside Yom Kippur. Shetubo hutra b'tzibur, says Rabbi Yehuda straight out. Because I hold Tumah is hutra b'tzibur. When everybody's tamei, nobody's tamei. Tamei is God. It's mutter legamri, and of course, he can go into the Kodesh Kadosh. You don't need the tzitz to be meratza. There is no tamei. It's tamei. And Tumah is mutter b'tzibur. It's completely mutter. So when the Kohen goes in there, even if the things were tamei, they're not tamei. Perfect. Michlal. Therefore, we got it. The Reb Shimon Saba Tumah is only duchya. Hu b'tzibur is only pushed off. The issa is really there. It's only pushed off. And in fact, you need the tzitz to be meratza. So he goes ahead and says, as long as the tzitz is in existence, in the possession of the Kohen Gadol, even if he's not wearing it, we're okay. Right? So the Amoraim of the yeshiva made the assumption that our Mishnah is following that Tumah is merely overridden, is duchya b'tzibur, and it requires the mikvah. I'm so sorry, just 1 minute. Hello? Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Okay. So, says the Gemara. The Kula Almon, and then they went further. They assumed further. Einat sitz meratza ala chilosa. They all said also this magical power of the tzitz to be meratza, to effect acceptance, is only in the offering itself, that the offering is accepted, that it can be brought up onto the altar. But it doesn't allow to the parts of the offering that are to be eaten. The tzitz is strong, it has the power to be meratza on the offering part. But on the parts that the kohen is going to eat, or the parts that the owners are going to eat, no. That already we're not going so far. The tzitz is pushed off, the isser is removed, is pushed to the side because of the power of the tzitz. That's in the offering to be offered on the mizbeach, to do the avodah, the zerika, to do the spritzing of the blood, to offer the emurim, to be burnt on the sacrificial parts to be brought up onto the mizbeach. But for you to eat it, that already you still took, because you still have tumah. It's only dukkha, it's pushed off because of the tzitz. Obviously, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold that. He holds merotza, and you can eat it completely. There is no tumah. So that's just saying, if you're going to say duchya, it's only duchya for the offering, but ein meratza, ein atzitz meratza ala chilasa. The leka tana, because there is no tana, the shamalei tama atzitz meratza ala chilasa, that the tzitz affects acceptance even of the eating part of the offering. Rabbi Eliezer, except for Rabbi Eliezer. The Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer, hatzitz meratza ala chilasa. The tzitz is so powerful if it affects acceptance of the Talmudic offering, to turn it into a Torah-dic one, in the sense of bringing it up on the altar. If you can think, if it accepts acceptance, it's acceptance completely, even on the eating part. Rabbi Yossi, it's not. It's only on the offering part, but you guys don't get to eat it because the mice and the tumah still exists. Okay, and therefore our Mishnah seems to follow, okay, the Rabbi Yossi's opinion. There we go. Okay? Says the Gemara, should we say that our Mishnah does not go with the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua? The Tanya we learned 77a4, where the pasuk says, the Brisa says, you shall make your oil offerings, those offerings that are offered all up to Hashem, the meat and the blood upon the mizbeach of Hashem you got. Rabbi Yeshua by the words habasa v'hadam, the blood, the meat and the blood, im ein dam ein basa. If there's no blood, there's no meat. If the blood of the oil becomes disqualified, if it gets tamei, it gets thrown, it falls on the floor, so it can't be spritzed, it can't be zoirik, can't be thrown on the altar, then the meat that comes along with it cannot be offered on the mizbeach, can't be burnt on the mizbeach. And flip side, if ain't basa, ain't badam. If for some reason the meat of the oil becomes lost or unfit, okay, becomes tamei or avad, becomes tamei or lost, then the blood, even though it's around, can't be sprinkled. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, they're not interdependent, they're mutually exclusive. He says, dam apapi shein basa. There's blood, even though there's no meat. The blood can be applied, can be zorik, can be thrown onto the altar, even if the meat has become lost or tamei. Shenema, because the pasuk says, the second part of this pasuk, the first part says, the second part says, V'dam zibochecha, and the blood of your feast offering should be poured upon the mizbeach of Hashem, and the meat you shall eat. The meat you shall eat. Ma ani mekayim. But if in that case, then you say each piece is mutually exclusive. The dam is the dam, the basa is the basa, and don't get confused together. What do you do with the first part of the pasuk that says habasa v'adam, which seems to say they're one? So if I'm missing one piece, everything is no good. Loi malacha, I'm coming to teach you. Ma dam b'zerika, habasa b'zerika. Just as the blood is placed on the altar by throwing it, so too the meat is placed on the altar by throwing it. The meat that needs to be offered on the altar is thrown onto the altar. Habi Ayman, this is we say that the ramp, here we go, the ramp, lul cotton yesh bein keves lemizbeach. There was a small cavity between the ramp and the mizbeach. The ramp was about an amma off, maybe a little less, between where it ended and the mizbeach started. It wasn't flush. It wasn't flush together. There was a space, and so to cover that space, you had to throw it from the top of the ramp onto the mizbeach. That's what it's coming to teach me. That the dam and the bus is the same, but like Zerika, just a dam is thrown onto the mizbeach. The meat that has to be brought up, the emurim that are going to be brought up, the mizbeach, that has to be thrown on because there's a gap. Good. Says the Gemara, but Rabbi Yeshua Nami, but Rabbi Yeshua also says the second half of the pasuk, v'dam zebachecha yishbach, and the blood of your feast shall be poured, and you shall eat the meat, which means dam is dam, basar is basar, blood is blood, meat is meat. They're not mutually interdependent. So how could he say, "Im ein dam, ein basar"? If there's no blood, there's no meat. If there's no meat, there's no blood. Dam. What do you have to interpret? On Malach, he'll say haksiv gabei, but it's written in the same paragraph. V'habasar teyochel, the meat you shall eat, which is the end of that pasuk, which implies that the blood is only poured if the meat can be eaten. Front, that they're mutually independent. Yes, you throw the blood. The meat you shall eat. But if I can't eat, if I can't eat the meat, I can't throw the blood. Very good. Now we're on Amid Beis, 77b1. Says the Gemara, Bahani Tati Kroll Lomali. So what do I need both segments of the pasuk? Why do I need the first half of the pasuk, which says and the last part, which is that you should throw the blood, right? Right? Essentially, the pasuk seems to be repeating itself. According to Rabbi Yeshua, that it's coming to teach us that they're mutually interdependent. Where I need one, I need the other. I can throw the blood only wherever I can eat the meat, right? But that's what the rashis of the pasuk said at the beginning. Now he's saying that's the exact same thing that the end of the pasuk is saying. So why do I have it at the beginning and the end to teach me the same thing? The Gemara, Chad ba'oila v'chad b'shlomim. One teaching is regard to the oila, the other is regarded to a shlomim, and I need it for both. The tzurich. Because if the pasuk had only taught this interdependence by an oila, oila is very stringent. She can't kolo. It's complete because she can't kolo because it's completely offered up on the mizbech. It's completely burnt on the mizbech, and nothing is left over for anybody, not for the kohen and not for anybody else. Avol shalom and deloy chamir, but shalom which is not stringent, but certain parts are left over. The chayzik v'yashayik are left over for the kohen. Aim aloi, I would say that doesn't apply. Consumption on the mizbeach. The shlomin brings parts up onto the mizbeach and parts are given to the kohen. Avol oilo, the less space stay achila. It only has one achila. Achila legevoya, achila, and eating to the most high on when it's burnt up on the mizbeach, right? Amaloi, I would say over there. Therefore, I don't have to wait basa b'dam. It doesn't. I don't need gold. The mashmallah that no, they're interdependent. The Rabbi Eliezer who says they're not interdependent. Rabbi Eliezer hakseba basa teyochel. How's he going to explain the second half of the pasuk? Amalacha hu miboyle. That it's not mutter to eat the meat until you first throw the blood. Okay? Now, I might have thought that the entire second half of the pasuk came to teach me this. But if that's the case, where do I know that you're allowed to sprinkle the dam? You're allowed to throw the dam on the mizbeach, even if the meat is lost or tamei. I'm a log. Rabbi Eliezer will come to tell you in Cain, if they're going to tell me that the whole pasuk is coming to tell us what it calls, comes to teach the meat is not allowed to be eaten until you first do the zerika sadam, you first throw the blood. Nichtay Rachman, then the pasuk is sort of simply written, Habasa teyocha, v'hodor v'dam zebechecha yishpat. The pasuk should have written, the meat you shall eat, and the blood of your feast offering you shall pour. Kidduxid b'reisha, like it's written in the reisha. V'sisa oilosecha habasa v'adam, the meat and the blood. My shirol, why in the second half of the pasuk does it say dam zevochecha yishpat? First you shall place the dam of your thing, and then afterwards it says v'abasa teyochel, you should eat the meat. Shma mino. Dam apapishem basa. You throw the blood even though the meat, there is no meat, it's lost or tamei. Shma mino shem basa mutar ba'achila. That basa itself does not become allowed to be eaten until you do the zarika. The Rabbi Yeshua, how does he know all about this? Eina basa mutar ba'achila shezarik adam. This that the meat is not allowed to be eaten until you first throw the blood. Kal b'chaymahu. I don't need a pasuk. I can learn it out from a Fortori argument, a basic argument. Uma imurin, just like the sacrificial parts of the animal. They do not hold back from eating lost or become tummy. If they imurin, the sacrificial parts become lost or they become tummy, you're allowed to go ahead and eat the meat. The kohen is allowed to go eat as chayzik m'shoik, for an example. But is nayu. But if they are in existence, they're here. They're ready to be brought up on the mizbeach. Ma'akif, then they become ma'akif. They do get in the way, and you're not allowed to eat until they're brought. Right? Dam, blood. The chilese ma'akif, which holds back from consuming the meat, even if it's not in existence. If the dam fell on the floor, or got lost, or got tomei, that's it, fafuch. If you don't do the zrika, you can never do the what he called. You can't eat the meat. If the dam is not there, you can't do the meat. If that then is the case, then obviously when it's not in existence, as opposed to the emurim, which if it's not in existence, doesn't stop us from being allowed to eat. Dam, which does stop us from allowing to eat if it's not in existence, certainly when it is in existence, of course it's going to get in the way. So I don't need the pasuk to tell me. But Rabbi Eliezer would tell me, I'll tell you why you need the pasuk. Because of lakra. Because something that we can learn out of it, the pasuk would rather teach to us specifically. But Rabbi Yeshua says just the opposite. Anywhere you can go ahead and be midday. You can expound. The Torah would rather you go expound and don't go ahead and make the Torah write it out straight out. The Torah would like you to use your head. Okay, 77b2. So now, now that you've come around and said our mission is a lot like Rabbi Yeshua, okay, now that we said that Rabbi Yeshua says that not only by Oila, but even by Shlomim and Shar Zavachim, by all Zavachim, that are eaten, we said, which is different from our Mishnah, which allows us to bring, which it does allow us to bring carbon sibas, communal offerings that are eaten even in a state of Tomei. Remember, it said Chamisha Devarim, you could bring the Tomei even though you're not going to eat it, right? The eating is not a ma'akiv in the bringing. You're allowed to go ahead, and we said by most Tanoim, it's because it's Tumas Duchya, it's pushed. It's only pushed because of the tzitz, and the tzitz is only meratza for the actual offering, but not in the eating. Except for Rabbi Eliezer, who says it has so much power, it can even out to the eating. But Rabbi Eliezer won't be the Tanah Mishnah, and Rabbi Yeshua is not a Tanah Mishnah, because Rabbi Yeshua clearly is saying, no, if I ain't basar, ain't dam, ain't basar. They're tied. If I can't eat it, I can't bring it. So now we see that Rabbi Yeshua cannot be a Tanah Mishnah. Ha shalem emasis the like Rabbi Yeshua, because Rabbi Yeshua, you can't say this. But since Rabbi Yeshua says we need both parts of the offering, the blood and the flesh, habasa v'hadam, to be good, and if you're missing one of them, the blood can't be thrown, right? The blood cannot be thrown. We cannot finish the avodah. We're done, right? But tzitz achilul miratze, and the fact is that the tzitz does not have the power. The tzitz does not have the power, except according to Rabbi Lezer, according to everybody else. The tzitz has no power to be meratze the eating. The most it can do is have the power to be meratze a tomatic carbon that was brought to say, okay, that it can be offered up, but not offered to be eaten, right? How can any offering be offered in a state of tamei, since the tzitz does not affect its sectors for the edible portion? And Rabbi Yeshua holds that if you don't have the basa, the eating part of it, you don't have the dam. So how do you go ahead and never have tumah hutah? Because even according to Rabbi Yeshua, of course you bring the carbon Pesach on Shabbos. Everybody, there isn't anybody who's mechalik on this. So Rabbi Yeshua holds it too. According to the way he holds, he boxes himself into a corner. He can't get out of it. Because he said, just because I'm allowed to bring it, offer it up, I'm not allowed to eat it. But the carbon Pesach, number one, has brought to be eaten. The Mishnah says you could eat it. And every other carbon that's brought is brought up, even though you can't eat it, according to Yeshua, you shouldn't be able to bring it. So where is he going over here? So something Gemara, Ela Tema, Rabbi Yeshua. You could say even according to Rabbi Yeshua. Ela Kisava, Rabbi Yeshua. We got to expand on what Rabbi Yeshua holds. Hatzitz meratza ala oilim. That sits is meratza for that which goes up on the mizbeach. In other words, the emurim, the sacrificial parts. So at least one portion of the meat is meratza by the tzitz. When he says habasar, he doesn't mean the basar that only to be eaten by us. Even the parts of the basar that are eaten, kaviyoko b'gevoya, for Hashem, on top of the mizbeach that is burnt on top of the mizbeach. As long as somebody is eating, as it were. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is eating as it is. It was burnt on top of the mizbeach. That's good enough. So therefore, there's at least one mamoshes, one chelik that we're allowed to go, that is allowed to be brought because of the tzitz is Maratza, what is brought up onto the Mizbeach, that you're allowed to burn the Aimurim, good enough. That's called eating. It's Shulchan Gevoya. It's on the table of the Most High. The Kadosh Baruch Hu Kaviyachal is eating, as it were, from the Mizbeach, right? And therefore, that's enough of the eating to go ahead and be Maratza to throw the dam. Says the Gemara, is that a fact? That's good by all other Zavachim. The Ika Oilin, because there are parts that go up on the Mizbeach, the Emurin of those Zavachim, Ela Oimer V'Shtei Alechem. But the Mincha offerings of the Oimer and the two breads, the Leka Oilin, that there are no Oilin, Mincha has the Kaimitz, the flour that goes up on the Mizbeach. But that's not what we're talking about here. Obviously, there's a difference. The Leka Oilin, what are you going to say over here? How could these be brought in a state of Tameh? It's got nothing to do with them. And for the Gemara, Amri, Ki Amar Rabbi Yeshua, Nami did eat entire. Did Rabbi Yeshua say that we need two parts, blood and the meat, i.e. the meat to be eaten, or at least meat that are the sacrificial parts, the Emurin, right, to be valid, the Zavochin. He said it by Zavochin. He said by Shvochin, Menachis like Omar. Regarding Menachis, he didn't say this. So you're right. He doesn't hold this. You're right. He doesn't say, what do you call this halacha that he says I need both dam v'basar, blood and the meat, whatever the meat is, meat to eat or meat to go up. That's only by zevach, by an animal offering. By Menachis, he wouldn't have such a problem. He'll say it's okay. If I don't have one thing, I can do the other thing. It's not a disaster. Umenachis, is that a fact that he doesn't say his halacha by Menachis? But in fact, it's not the case. Umenachis lo yama, but now we learn regarding the mincha offering, shenitlu shiara, abdu shiara. If it's remainder, obviously you take a kaimitz. Now you're left over with the rest of the flour. If the rest of the flour becomes tameh, right, burnt or gets lost, becomes tameh or lost before the kaimitz is offered on the mizbeach. Before the kaimitz is offered on the mizbeach, it means after I picked up the flour and I'm bringing that over to the mizbeach, something happens to the leftover flour, right? Kemidas Rabbi Eliezer Keshera. According to the standard of Rabbi Eliezer, the mincha is good. Midas Rabbi Yeshua psula. According to Rabbi Yeshua, it's but no good. So you see, Rabbi Yeshua holds his halach even with regard to the mincha, that if you're missing the mincha part, right, the shirayim, the leftover parts disappear, they get lost or whatever, then you can't bring the kaimitz on the mizbeach. So you see, he holds you need both parts, even by the mincha. Dr. Gemara, kemidas v'loy kemidas. No, Rabbi Yeshua is a hybrid when it comes to menachos. Kemidas Rabbi Yeshua to be eating tarte, that we need two parts in order for the avodah to proceed. You need two parts. V'loy kemidas Rabbi Yeshua. Da'afilu Rabbi Yeshua b'zavachim. Ki b'zavachim amar, the menachos lo yamar. By menachos he does not say. Ve'ilu hai tana sabra afilu b'menachos. And the other tana holds the rule applies even by menachos. So he would say, no, you don't need it. I'm sorry, you don't need it. It's okay. It's not a disaster. It's shirayim. Once you take the kaimitz, once you picked up the kaimitz, you're good to go. Zakti Gemara, uman uhai tana de tani kabose, the umachnit fei minei. And who's this Tana that holds like Yeshua, but is even more stringent than Rabbi Yeshua and holds this rule that no, that if the kaimitz wasn't brought up yet and the leftover flour gets lost, fafuch, which is stronger than Rabbi Yeshua. Who is this? We have no Tana. I've looked through the entire Shas. We've got nobody that says that. Nobody's to the right of Rabbi Yeshua. He's it. He's the end of the line. So if that's the case, well, we're on 77b3. And this is where we're headed to. Tanya, we learn straight out in the Brisa. Rabbi Yosi says, I see the virtue of the words of Rabbi Eliezer regarding the mincha, as well as by zavachim, animal offerings. by grain offerings and Zavachim offerings. Divi Rabbi Yeshua b'Zavachim Menachos. And I see the virtue of Rabbi Yeshua's words regarding animal offerings and Menachos offerings. Divi Rabbi Lezer b'Zavachim. I see the virtue of Rabbi Lezer's working regarding animal offerings. Sha'ayah because Rabbi Lezer used to say, Dam Alpapi She'en by Basa, there's blood even if there's no meat, that you can spritz the blood even if the meat is no longer available. Rabbi Yeshua says regarding the Zabachim, Shayayim, Ain Dam, Ain Basa. If there's no blood, there's no meat. Then Ain Basa, Ain Dam. If there's no meat, there's no blood. And I see the virtue of Shayayim, Kaimitz, Apabi, Shein Shirayim, that you can bring, if there's a Kaimitz, even if the remaining flour is no longer available. Rabbi Yeshua b'Menachos, the words of Rabbi Yeshua b'Menachos, Shayayim ain't kaimitz, ain't shirayim, ain't shirayim, ain't kaimitz. So this Baraisa says straight out that Rabbi Yeshua holds his opinion even by Menachos. So if that's the case, the previous problem arises since we assume that the tzitz does not affect acceptance on what's being eaten, only on what's being brought up onto the Mizbeach, only what's being offered to the Most High, not what's going to be eaten. How can our Mishnah, which allows the Omer and the Shtei Alechem to be brought in a state of Tomei, because Tom is Dochi B'tzibor, Tom is Totra B'tzibor, how can it go according to Rabbi Yeshua, who seems to say I need both, which would require me the eating part as well, the Gabi Menachos, because nothing is going up by Menachos, so it has to be that you can eat it. Ela K'sav Rabbi Yeshua, Hatzitz Meratza, Ala Oilem V'Ala Achilas. The tzitz does affect acceptance for what goes up on the altar and for that which is eaten. So that's, we've come all the way around. So that means even the item and the two legs can be offered, because what can be eaten is now okay. If now Rabbi Yeshua has come all the way back to us, that Rabbi Yeshua has come all the way back to us, that even the tzitz is meratza on what could be eaten, Amai b'midas Rabbi Yeshua psula, then what is it that you said before? According to the standard of Yeshua, it's puzzle. Rabbi Yeshua should concede that the case in which it becomes tamei, the kametz can be offered, and the mincha is valid, since the tzitz it affects acceptance on the parts that which can be eaten. Says the Gemara, you're right, the parts that could be eaten. But what about where the Menachos is over the sorrow? The Shirayim disappear, get lost, or get burned. They're not here to be eaten. Now Rabbi Yeshua is going to say, I got a problem. Now there's nothing for which the tzitz to affect acceptance. I'm not going to be able to bring up the Kemitza. Says the Gemara, if that's the case, Ela nitba lamand katani. Then for what purpose of the Tana in the Mishnah teaches the case of the Shirayim becoming tamei? Since Rabbi Yeshua concedes that the mincha is valid, and his opinion that you need both does not apply because the tzitz has the power to be meratz if it's in existence, the meratz of da'achila. Why did the Mishnah need to mention this case? Could it be for Rabbi Eliezer to teach regarding Rabbi Eliezer? Pshita, that's obvious. Rabbi Eliezer holds that the mincha is good in this case. Hashta, because yesh loyma ovid b'sara listen machshir Rabbi Eliezer, because it can even be said that even in the case where the remaining flour is lost or burnt and is not in existence, Rabbi Eliezer would still say the mincha is good. Nitma de'isa mibaya, but where it becomes tamei, which means it still exists, it's here, it's just that tamei. Rabbi Eliezer would certainly say it's good. If mamish, when it's out of existence, it's good. According to Rabbi Eliezer, you can still bring, as long as I already took the kemitza, I can bring it. Certainly, where the shirayim are here, they're just tamei, so they're in existence, and I already took the kemitza, I certainly can bring it. Ella, that doesn't make sense if that's what the Mishnah will come to tell us. Ella pshita Rabbi Yeshua. The Mishnah is coming to teach us about Rabbi Yeshua. The Ketani Psula, and it says it's puzzle. So we see from over here that Rabbi Yeshua, in fact, cannot hold that the tzitz affects acceptance for what's going to be eaten. The tzitz is only good enough for the things that are going to be brought up on the Mizbeach. And not only that, we learned in the Baraisa, Rabbi Yeshua says, calls regarding all animal organs in the Torah, whether the meats became tamei and the cheled, which is the sacrificial fats, exist. The sacrificial fats are become tamei, the basar is good, is tar, zayrik es adam. You can throw the blood. But if both the chaylev and the basar become tamei, no, you cannot throw the bud. Alma, kisava Rabbi Yeshua, this is Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua holds, einat sitz meratal al oilim eloya, einat sitz meratal al oilim eloya aloich. That in fact it sits, does not affect acceptance, not even for the stuff that goes up on the mizbech, i.e. the chaylev, the sacrificial fats. You see over here that it does not, nor what is eaten, the basar part that is eaten. So we're left with we go now, having learned this whole daf, we're back to the beginning. Can our Mishnah, which allows us to bring carbon tziburs, communal offerings, in a state of tumah, because tumah is chutra b'tzibur, is allowed in tzibur, or tumah is duchi b'tzibur, is pushed off in a tzibur, which allows us to bring it. How can it be reconciled to Rabbi Yeshua, who holds you need both parts? That the part that in other, you need both the dam and the basar in order to do the avodah, right? You need both the dam, which is used for the avodah, and the basar that needs to be consumed, right? Must be valid in order to do the avodah. So can Rabbi Yeshua, in fact, be involved in our mission of tumas chutra b'tzibur, tumas duchi b'tzibur? And this is where we're leaving off. We're on the bottom, 5 lines on the bottom. El Elohim Rabbi Yeshua himas nisan. Our Mishnah is according to Rabbi Yeshua, and the Gemara is going to explain, going to have to re-explain Rabbi Yeshua and exactly what's going on, and that's where we're picking it up on Sunday.